Hey everyone, it's been a little while since my last video and I'm really excited to be back. Over the past few months, I've made a few changes in how I work, some shifts in my process that have really helped me grow. So today I thought it would be great to walk you through my current painting process and share what's been working for me. My goal, by the way, with this channel in particular is to make oil painting feel more approachable, whether you're feeling intimidated about trying oils for the first time or looking to build on your existing skills. So I hope this will be helpful to you. I've already done some underpainting or really just blocked in some parts of the big picture, so to speak, to get a feel for the painting from the start. In my previous video, I showed how I mix colors with a traditional limited palette, which is a great starting point for beginners. That's the palette I started with myself, but it has evolved over the years, and here I'm showing my actual palette that I'm using these days. It does change a bit from painting to painting, but this is generally what I'm working with now. And if you're wondering about the color names, I've listed them in the description as well. I like to start with the eye area, and I usually establish the darks first. Here in this portrait it happened so that the area around the eyes is in the shadow, so it's darker. This immediately helps set the tone and gives depth as we move to the other parts of the face. And we already have some dark values placed on the left, so that's great because it's commonly very challenging to people, especially for beginners, to place dark tones as dark as they actually need to be, to paint dark values correctly. They always seem darker than they really are against a blank canvas, but they look completely different once you put them in context with other tones. Have you seen those optical illusion videos where colors look different depending on their surroundings? The same exact colors appear completely different when placed next to a complementary color or different values. Your eyes trick you because your perception changes based on context. This is exactly why someone's portraits may end up looking flat. They make shadow areas too light because they feel like it and they don't trust the process. They don't believe the shadows should be as dark as they actually need to be. Basically, I do about 80 to 90% of the work in one layer, painting wet on wet. I try to bring it closer to what it's going to look like at the end. Then, once it dries, I go in with some corrections or small improvements. I might do glazing, which is a technique I'm very fond of, and adjust some colors if needed. That's the workflow. I heavily focus on values, the lightness or darkness of a color, because that's one of the most important things when it comes to creating realism. That's what creates depth and dimension in our paintings and drawings. The goal is to place the right tones, values exactly where you see them, whether you're painting from life or using a reference. Speaking of tones, I create a variety of them on my palette from a few tones I pre-mix beforehand. Here we can see her cheeks are more red, while some areas are more neutral, so to speak, leaning slightly green or blue or purple in hue. The shadows are warm and the lit areas are more on the cooler side. I pay attention to these subtle color shifts since they also play an important role in making a portrait feel lifelike. I like to build a portrait gradually. That's one approach. You may also choose to block in more of the face earlier and keep adjusting and shaping things as you go. Each stroke and each area informs the one next to it because you're constantly comparing the values and tones to one another. Be mindful and constantly assess the painting from a proportions and likeness perspective. Even if you have a starting sketch, it can be a very helpful guide, but it doesn't guarantee your proportions will stay correct through to the end. Oil paint is very fluid and easy to blend, so it's common for lines to shift and move a lot, especially if you're overworking an area, which obviously isn't ideal anyway, but it tends to happen overall. Things shift around, so keep looking at your subject and comparing it to your painting. Be deliberate about it. Don't just rely on the pencil sketch if you have one, or any other type of measurement marks or lay-in that you might have done with thinned paint when you're working from life. Also, I'm not overly defining or outlining facial features. When you look at someone in real life, notice the forms, edges, and transitions between different parts of the face. Are they more soft or defined? More often than not, you'll see they're kind of feathered, right? Many have a transition color. You rarely need to paint features with a clear, sharp outlines, and even if you do, it should be only in a few spots, not all the way around the shape, which is especially true when it comes to painting portraiture. If we're talking about painting a still life, inanimate objects have more wiggle room in this regard. For example, if we're painting a glass of water, it has a strong geometric shape, it might have a bright defined highlight on the side, some sharp edges, but even then it blends with the environment, it's integrated. There are always more defined and less defined parts, otherwise it will seem like it was carved out from the surroundings and won't feel real. Which brings me to something else I wanted to mention. There is always a focal point in a painting. Some things are more in focus and some aren't. Consider where you want to draw attention in your painting. If you don't decide this yourself, it might emerge on its own and not always where you intended. That's why I like to think about composition and placements of things in advance, especially with more complex paintings. There should normally be less important parts, supporting or background elements, or they will conflict with the main ones. You have your foreground and focal point, and then everything else can be less defined. Like using a camera, you can make those areas more blurry, less defined, more subtle, or keep them in shadow. That gives the painting a beautiful effect, I believe. Let me tell you more about a few changes I've made. Instead of using pre-primed acrylic toned surfaces, even though I still use them for some sketches on paper, I've started toning, like doing a wash, straight with oil paint and establishing bigger shapes, blocking them out to see how it's all going to look. I find this helpful because it ends up being more cohesive, harmonious, and less fragmented. Even though I still have the starting sketch and I think through the overall composition I want, this approach helps me bring the image together more visually, helps me start off better. Some of you might remember that I've excluded all solvents and paint thinners from my process for years. Now I'm seeing there are better, newer options on the market and how useful odorless mineral spirits can be. Not so much for the portrait part, but for the abstract elements, washes, toning. Normally I use bleached linseed oil or refined safflower oil as my medium, and I use liquid when I need the paint to dry faster for glazing and for painting more translucent parts. That's what I've been using for some of the semi-transparent strokes in the background and abstract elements. And now I'm also using odorless mineral spirits for many of those things I just mentioned when I want the paint to be more fluid, less thick, more like a wash. So that's been another little change or improvement in my process. Also, I'd like to mention that my approach or the way I paint isn't set in stone. It differs somehow with each painting. I believe that's how it should be for you as well. It keeps it interesting and caters to each particular artwork, the mood I'm in, even the time I have to allocate to it. All of this plays a role. Sometimes I like to do more of an underpainting, extend to new areas quicker. Other times I'm more reserved and careful with each stroke. Don't forget to clean or switch between your brushes. I can switch a brush before picking up a new color tone, and I often wipe my brush off with a paper towel when I pick up a similar color tone that's still different enough in value, for example, to avoid polluting it. You can also rinse your brush in the medium you're using. That's a very valid method as well. I started to experiment more with mixed media. I've been using acrylics and chalk and pastels. Acrylics are very simple to deal with, and I love the convenience of washing brushes after it. Just a little water rinse and they're fine, whereas with oils it's a bit of a longer process. I loved starting a painting with acrylics and then working with oils on top. You can't switch them around, unfortunately, so be very careful about that. Oh, and let me share a few quick practical tips. Always have enough paper towels or tissues at hand when painting. It's essential. Taking breaks is important when painting. It allows you to reset and look at your work with fresh eyes. Another thing I suggest is sometimes painting standing up. Let me tell you, if I sit down all the time, I'm usually very close to the painting and very comfortable, which is great for painting smaller details, little adjustments and all that, but I start losing sight of the entire piece and losing track of time completely. Then I discovered standing up. You can work on the whole painting easier. You become more engaged with it instead of getting tunnel vision on one small area. You are more considerate of the whole portrait and how it all ties together. You can hold your brushes farther away and you feel more active. With this painting, I really enjoyed exploring something more conceptual, something that suggests a story or invites interpretation, where people can read into it in their own way. I wanted to bring in more movement and nature elements this time, and that's been wonderful. One thing that I kept thinking about though as I worked was the format. Initially, I wanted it to be vertically elongated to emphasize the movement. So it's 70 by 100 centimeters, which is roughly 28 by 40 inches. But towards the end, I found myself wishing it was just a bit more balanced, maybe closer to 70 by 90. That way, the composition would have emphasized the movement without as much empty space at the bottom. I ended up using that space to add sort of a sense of flow, but it is something that I'll keep in mind for the next time. I have a lot more to share and to talk about, but this is it for today. I will upload more regularly now, and if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer, and I'd love to hear from you. Have an amazing day or night or evening, and I'll see you next time. Bye!